Welcome back, peeps. My name is Chad Wilson from Simple Cloudware, and today we are talking about accounts. Luckily, there are APIs that help simplify account creation, and we're going to be using one of those today. So stay tuned, and remember, keep your head in the cloud. All right, let's get started here. So we're going to continue on with our data services. And we already have our token process in place. And so we're going to start by creating another endpoint. And this is going to be starting out by adding an account. Of course, we want to make sure to be very careful as we add in the account. And we're going to be bringing in the account model. And of course, you should always start every coding project by adding in the models, because it'll be the first thing that we'll actually be using. So let's get this model in here. And it's going to be an export class, account model. And we're just going to go through the list of names, all the different parameters here. And once again, it's absolutely essential to make sure that we get this all typed in correctly. Many times with these models, you'll be following a pattern that's been given to you either out of a user guide or an example, and it needs to be perfectly mapped. So we're just going through the classic account parameters, which are the identifiers and the particular address, contacts, created date, username. This is actually where we're going to be storing the secret and the password, because we're going to create these particular accounts to either use an API or use your own application. So we're going to need the ability to house their secrets, their passwords, and what client they're tied to. Alright, so now let's add this newly created model to our data services. All right, and there we go. First step. So the next thing we're going to do with this post is we're going to create a body in which we are going to send this account model, and then we're going to use the triple dot, and what this does is it's going to map in the entire model to the body. It's kind of a shorthand instead of typing in all the different parameters. And then we're going to, of course, be passing in our token. And we're going to be doing that in session. And this particular project is based on what we recorded beforehand, so you can go back and look in the prior tutorials. That gets you up to the point of creating a token. So have a look at those if you haven't already, and that way you can follow along. And you can see here we're creating the post with the URL, the body, and the parameters. So we're looking good. Alright, so now let's create the particular component for the account page. Then we're going to save this, and then we're going to go down to our modules and add our newly created page. See, it's here, so it's good. And then let's get this into our navigation. We'll create the routers. Alright, looks good. And now let's actually add it to our navigation. Alright, now we have a home. Now let's just make sure that our navigation works. So typing in yarn start, which kicks up the project. All right. And then we can just use the control click to bring up the browser. And let's just make sure that this is all connecting without errors. All right. Account. All right, so we got a good account page. So now let's connect our API to our page. We'll start with the imports. And for this, we're going to introduce the concept of forms. We won't be using them in this project, minus the submission, but it's going to lay that foundation for the next set of projects that are going to be based on this. And kind of the overarching idea is, first we make the connection to an API, then we create accounts, and then once we have accounts, then we can start working on creating logins and all the particular functionality that would be account-based. So we're just kind of laying the foundation for an entire application. So there's our form groups, control validators, and then of course our data service, which is where our API calls are. Clean this up. All right, looks good. And then let's bring in our models. All right, and let's add a couple parameters so we can see this in the HTML. So this will give us the ability to see the actual set of accounts that we create, and the fact that we saved an account when we add it, and then a form group in which we'll house our saved button. Now we're going to inject our data services into the constructor. And here's where we're creating our form. And for now, it's just going to be empty. And this is where we're going to put all of our form fields for account creation. But now let's work on just actually creating something and submitting it to make sure that our connectivity works. And we're just going to follow the standard on click submit. You can name this whatever you want. I usually include on click in the naming convention just so I can quickly find it in the code and know that this is coming from an interaction with the UI. And instead of getting all the information for the UI, for now, let's just create the model ourselves, just hand roll it in code. And I'll just grab this from the account class. And let's just bring it in and then modify it. And we're just going to fill in some junk data. And there are several of these fields that we will not know or that are auto-generated on the server. And many times for the external IDs, this is where you would tie in maybe some sort of a payment ID or an ID that relates to a similar system, either that you're building or someone else's API. And in upcoming videos, we'll talk about how to validate these particular fields and which validation should be done inline or as they're typing it in, and which particular things like valid address should be done on a server so it can actually check the address itself for validity. And we see here we've got a spelling update. So my arch nemesis, the spelling error. Now let's go and get it. All right. And create a date would be something that would be generated by code. And that could be a tricky matter. Create a date depending on, is it the time on the individual's computer or on a server or whatnot. So it creates a lot of issues on when things are created. So you want to be careful when deciding that. Plus there's the different time zones and these sort of things. The secret's one thing that's generated on the server, but we'll need a particular password, and we're gonna make it active. And for now, we don't need a client ID. You can see the question mark here, which means that it's nullable. So you don't have to include it. Okay, looks good. So now we're going to call out to the data service and let's add this account. Many times for posts, we can just not have a return. It's a common pattern, and so we can just set that it was successful here. And there's also quite a bit of elaborate error handling, but we're not going to deal with any of that now. We're just going to do the minimum needed to make the connection just to get you started. Let's clean this up a little bit. Alright, so this is looking clean. And then we can add this account save just so we can see it. Alright, so now let's add in our form that just has a save button. And here we're tying it to the form group that we created. And the second piece of this, we're tying it to the actual function that will be receiving this click. On click submit, so this kind of ties it together. And this is where you would pass the values in. Alright, now let's create our button. And we'll worry about the classes and the visualization later. And then let's actually bring this saved closer to the button. Okay, looks good. Let's just add a space here just so everything's cleaned up, and let's run this and see if we are saving an account. One thing that I did forget is since we're using the form, let's add that to our modules. All right. Now we have these as part of the imports, so any component can now import these. Good, now let's run it. All right, and then we control click, and let's bring this bad boy in. Okay, quick count. I didn't get anything. Let's take a peek and see what happened. Oh yes, let's create the token first. I forgot about that. Okay, so we created the token and verified it. And now let's attempt to create the account. There we go. Just forgot to click on the token. And when somebody is coming into their website or whatnot, when they log in, it will automatically create the token as part of that process. Since we haven't gotten there yet, manually click the button, or we could run it as part of the init. Alright, so let's start with the second step. Now that we have an actual ad account, let's create the ability to see the accounts that we've added. So we're gonna call out to the get accounts by clients. Be careful on the endpoint. Make sure to check your models. And then we're going to make an array of accounts because there's going to be multiple accounts. And then let's add in our token here from session. Okay, looks good. And then we're going to add this on a init, because as soon as you come to the page, it would be good to see what accounts you actually have. So we're just going to add this directly. Pretty straightforward call. And then we'll just map it to our accounts, which is also, you can see, an array. Good. So now let's go over and create the HTML that will display this. Oops. Autocorrect. And we're just going to create a simple table with some headers. And I think for this demonstration, we're just going to show just the basic minimum needed to verify that we're actually updating and creating these accounts. Good. And here's where the angulars coming in, so we can per record display each one of them in a row. So we're going to use the ng4, and we're just going to set each account to an item. And then we're just going to use the double brackets to display them. And try to make sure that you have all the spelling errors out, because that'll create issues. Alright, there's a spelling error right there. And active. Alright, looks good. Save this and give it a shot. Alright, now we're gonna control click on this and bring it on in. Create the token, of course. Alright, there we go, and we check to verify it. And now we're seeing if we're pulling in all the names. Great. I've only tried this out 1 or 2 times. So the next thing we want to do, now that we can see that we are bringing in accounts, we were able to create an account, we want to set account to active and inactive. So let's start by following our pattern of creating the API call. And we're going to be bringing in the account ID so we know which one to set to active or inactive. So we're going to need an account ID and then which one is it going to be. So we can activate our accounts or we can inactivate our accounts. And then of course we're going to need to pass these 2 parameters to the API. And if the API is expecting the exact same name, then you can just pass it in without mapping to it. It's kind of a shortcut. Okay, and let's take this and let's create a click event. Put this in here just as a guide. So we'll do on click active this time. Now we're going to need to bring in the account ID so we know which account to update. And also its status. We can pass these in from the UI instead of going and looking them up. So the one thing that we want to do here is when we click, we want it to do the opposite of what its current state is. So we're just going to create a variable to capture and then an if else to switch back and forth. So we'll just call it active. And create an if else statement here. So we're going to be switching what we receive to its opposite. Okay, and first thing we want to do is we want to check the is active that's passed in, and we're going to use the triple equals to make sure that's exactly true. And then we're going to set active to its opposite. Let's get our formatting right. And then it'll just bounce back and forth between them. Looks good. Now we can use this information to make the call. And then we're going to pass account ID we collected from the UI and the active, which is the opposite of the UI. And then we're going to subscribe. And the one visual indicator that we can use instead of using a success or failure label is we can actually update our grid. And how we're going to do that is we're going to get this get accounts out of the init, make it its own function, and then we can call it from init, and then we can call it also once we're successful in submitting our active update. So we just copied it out of there, and then we're just going to grab this and put it in both places. Alright, and that'll keep our UI up to date as we're making changes. Also, when you're calling a function, you need to use this so it knows where to look for it. Alright. Alright, everything looks good. So now let's hop over to the UI and add this click. So we'll switch this to status, and then this will be our active. And add another column. And here's where we'll put our button. And if you notice, this particular call is outside of our form, which is fine. So we're just going to use the click here. It's going to have two different types of connecting to the function. One through a form, and then another one is directly. Now we'll be passing in the ID and passing in the status. And you see here, once we're inside the click, that we don't use our brackets, but we can just directly call the item. Okay. Now let's just throw an alert here to make sure that we're capturing everything that we expect. Just a little visual indicator. You can also do this by adding it to the console. I usually do it this way so I don't forget to take out the alert, so the console doesn't get filled up with messages that aren't necessary. Let's run this and see what we got. So we've got a couple new concepts here. We have the switching of active, we have update, call, and we have the refresh of the UI after a successful call. So get our token and our account. There are all of our names. We'll go down here, push the active. You see we got all the information that we expected. That's good. And there we go. You see it set itself to false and refresh the UI. And let's just see if it'll return to true. There we go. Cool. So the last piece is let's delete an account. So it's very similar to the update, but we're going to just eliminate it. We don't need the active. Now we're going to update that, make sure everything's correct, knock out the is active. Okay, so now let's add the delete. So we're going to follow a similar pattern to the active, where we're going to collect up the account ID. And we're going to call directly to the data services. add in that account ID. And we're going to subscribe. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the active and show that it's updated by refreshing the interface using the get. All right, and then let's add our button for deleting. I'm going to switch this to delete, and then knock out the extra parameter. Change the name of it. Okay, looks good. Let's get this extra code out of here. Get a space. So everything's nice and neat. Now let's just move this alert down here, just so we can make sure that we're capturing the right information. Take the is active out. Okay, looks good. Let's give it a shot. Start up our application. All right, get our token, count. All right, and then let's do account 2, push delete, should disappear. We got our right information, and there it goes. So we've seen it disappear, which means that we actually deleted it. Congratulations. Congratulations, peeps! You have now created an account, which is a foundational piece of your software in which you can use for profiles and logins. Keep your head in the clouds.